Greetings, my name's Andrew Sumner. My grandfather, Pop Smythe, bought me my first comic book in Liverpool, England, when I was 3 years old, and I spent the next 50 years hurtling around the pop culture kaleidoscope, first as a fan, and then as a journalist, editor, publisher and presenter. Along the way, I met a bunch of interesting people who will be joining me here, creators, performers, professionals and public servants. We live in divisive, fractured times, but art and popular culture connect people from all viewpoints and from all walks of life. I'm often struck by the passions people enjoy, that they can set aside their differences for and agree on whatever those passions are, whether I share them or not. And that spark, that moment of instinctive, connective agreement, that's what I call a hard agree. So, Mark, when you, in terms of the Bottlework show, it's in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and am I right in thinking that the show is running for 8 weeks?
Yeah, it actually started or opened last week, or earlier this week, on the 15th. So it's open.
That's the 15th of July.
Yes, so it's open now. It's, my stuff's not in there. My brother and dad are putting some stuff still in there. So it's still kind of, being seeded, with information. There's still, there's a lot of stuff that's set up that people are touring it right now. The private opening, with the Ditko family and kind of sponsors and select people is on the 24th of July. So that's this coming Saturday. So, my plan is to get out there and obviously be there for that. And then from there, it's just a whole series of things. The Ditko play, that Lenny put together is on Sunday.
Which I've seen, by the way, mate. I saw that in, I think it was back in 2019 at New York Comic Con. Yeah, I saw it and enjoyed it very much, actually. Have you seen it yourself?
I've only ever seen, the video of the thing. So I haven't actually seen it live. Lenny, of course, invited me and I didn't get out to New York, that time.
Yeah.
So I hadn't seen it. So anyway, he's doing it. He's doing it in Johnstown. So that's on the 25th. And then there's kind of a series of things happening through the weekend. There's, art classes on the weekend through August. And then there's a big event over the weekend in September, and then it ends up with the comic convention, the Ditko Comic Con on the 11th of September, and where we're going to auction off then all of the Ditko inspired art that people are submitting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That is absolutely fantastic.
Oh yeah.
And that seems like a good moment for me to say, welcome to Hard Agree. My name's Andrew Sumner, and I'm privileged to be joined by Mark Ditko, the nephew of my all-time favorite comic book creator, the legend that is Steve Ditko. And Mark, you and I have corresponded for a while, and it's great to see you face to face and have this chat with you, brother.
Yeah, it's good to be here. It was, like I said, for me, a long time coming and being able to do these things. But yeah, you were one that it was on my hit list as I gotta sit down with Andrew.
Yeah, no, it's so good, mate. And I wonder if we could start at the beginning in a way, because of course you knew your Uncle Steve your entire life. So when did you first enter the world yourself, Mark?
I was born in 1959, April 7th.
Yeah, nice one. So you're a couple of years older than me, and only a couple, and you're so therefore, by the time you were not much more than a toddler, that's essentially when the really famous era of your uncle's Marvel career began, right?
Yeah, right. And you know what? Kind of with that, I started looking at comics because they were around the house, which I still don't know how they got there, but they were always around the house. But when I was maybe four or five, probably 63, 64 era, what I remember, my first exposure to comics was Conga.
Oh wow! Okay, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, so that was my era, that was my connection. It was the Conga, and at that point, I didn't realize. Conga was such a fun character, for me as a kid. Made me sort of almost. It was probably a big, motivation for me just falling in love with gorillas in general. Big fan of gorillas. But that was, but at that time, I didn't really know. I didn't know my uncle did that stuff.
Yeah.
I just liked the comic, and I liked, the comics that were around the house, and that was just one of them.
Well, and what age do you think you were when you realized that your Uncle Steve was actually, a comic book creator and was responsible for his classic characters and all these names that subsequently throughout the course of your life have come to dominate popular culture?
That's tough. I get asked that question because it seems like, everybody has their sort of aha moments of their points in time where there's this like connection and the switch goes on. It's like, oh my gosh, but I gotta say, as maybe disappointing as it is, I can't really spot that period, because for me, I wasn't, even though there were comics around the house as a kid and I read comics, it wasn't like an intimate part of my lifestyle.
Yeah, sure.
We lived in Pennsylvania in the woods. We had jobs, we worked, we went to school, we kind of had our own lives. And my uncle was really just around. Heck, in through the 60s, I didn't even know he didn't live there.
Yeah.
He was around at barbecues. He was around at Christmas. He was around whenever the family got together. I had no idea he was in New York. So my like locating this aha moment of, oh my gosh, Uncle Steve is Steve Ditko, I'd have to say it was probably in my early teens or mid-teens. But even then, it wasn't something that was so like shocking to me. It was just like, oh my gosh, that's kind of cool. He invented Post-it notes. Like, wow. It was that kind of I'm not mild, but it was such a non-eventful thing. I was like, wow, that's actually really cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because the thing about family relationships, and I think a lot of people, when they ask you these questions, we're on in the moment focusing on the dynamics of family relationships, which is that actually few of us have any real sense from our close extended family members, uncles and aunts and that kind of thing, cousins. When I think about it now, there are some of my cousins, I've got no idea what they do for a living. And I'm in my late 50s. I've known them all my life. I'm close to them. They're very interesting people to me, but I couldn't tell you what they did because that never factors in our conversations. Yeah, and so it's totally believable to me that that was your experience.
Then if you found out all of a sudden that one of your cousins, nephews, uncles was somebody who used to tour with Black Sabbath or Pink Floyd or something, you just go like, wow, that's amazing, and it would probably be about the end of it.
Yes. Yeah, right on. Yeah, no, I absolutely. You go, oh, amazing, but it doesn't supersede that familial relationship we got with them, where there's somebody you're close to and whose company that you like, because that's the bedrock of what your interaction with them is. It's everything. And the other stuff is just an interesting footnote, right? Because I think also your ability to be blown away by things that your own very close family members do is substantially reduced because you know them so intimately. So you almost never have those aha eureka moments where, well, hang on, you used to be the real life James Bond. You never mentioned that to me before.
Yeah. It's anticlimactic in a way.
Right on, Mark. Yeah, right on, Mark. I do completely understand. So to talk about your actual experience with your Uncle Steve, what was your relationship like with him as you were growing up, when you were a kid, when you became a man? Well,
it obviously changed like all relationships do.
Yeah.
In the beginning, he was just another one of my fun uncles. I have to say that I led. I had a pretty idyllic childhood.
Yeah.
We lived in a great place, surrounded the dead end road, nothing but woods and ponds, and we hiked and we spent outdoors time, and we had our relatives around and family barbecues and stuff. And fun uncles. One uncle that was a magician, and every time he'd come over, he'd do magic tricks for us. And other one, Uncle Steve could draw, and he would wrestle, and we would, so it was kind of was just very idyllic,
Yeah.
So early on, he was just another one of my fun uncles or aunts. I love my family. And then it's, probably the first sort of entrance point was at one point when I was little. He was probably showing my older brother, who's 2 years older than me. My brother, we were always drawing as kids. He was older, so he started a little bit earlier. So he was probably drawing something and showing my uncle for whatever reason. We maybe knew that he drew. And my uncle would just kind of give him some tips and pointers. So I just said, "Hey, Uncle Steve, can you draw gorillas?" And sure, he just grabs a piece of paper and he whips out this just killer gorilla. And I was like, "Whoa, that's amazing. You're such a good artist." Little did I know he's drawing Conga that I'm reading, the comics at home. So initially it was just, wow, he's an awesome uncle, and he's could draw so well. He's obviously got some skills there. Then as we kind of got older and older, we stayed, kind of just sort of in a playful mode, just as kids and uncles would be. But then for me, it changed a bit when I was a late teen. When I was a late teen, I probably was sort of flashing back like the sort of a hippies kind of like rebellious sort of era, but just in really mostly in terms of attitude. I had longer hair, never wore a shirt, headbands, braids and stuff. So I remember being at the kitchen table at my house. I don't even remember why we were there. My uncle was there, and I was just, I don't know, maybe I was probably 17, 18 or something, late high school. And I was just complaining. Maybe it was probably my first year in college, and I was just complaining about some world condition. It's like, just ragging on something. And he was always somebody who you could always talk to. He was always so even keeled. It was almost like there was no subject necessarily that was taboo from my perspective. So we're just talking there, and he looks at me and he says, "So what are you doing about that?" I was like, "Nothing." Like what kind of statement is that? Like, I'm not doing anything about it. And he said, "Well, if you're not doing anything about it, then really you have no right to complain. You can't really say anything, because if you're not doing something about it, then apparently you just have to live with that." I was like, whoa, that was deep. So then we started a little bit more of a kind of a philosophical, relationship. At that point, then I sort of turned into the seeker. Jehovah's Witnesses would come to the door, Mormons, I invite them in, it's like, yeah, show me what you got, So then at that point, he started to kind of feed me some information. He gave me some tapes to listen to, some sort of just like, positive, perspective things. So then at that point, I started to see him through a completely different lens. And then ultimately, I ended up graduating. I moved down the Virgin Islands and lived down there for a while, and in a tent in the jungle. And then I ended up coming back and ultimately moving to Phoenix, Arizona, having a family. And then ultimately in 1990, I moved to Los Angeles, and it just, the chain of events was kind of interesting. I just then started to write to him. I started to, stumble back into comics. For me, I was literally going shopping one time, and I saw a yard sale across the street, and I walked over, and they had a bunch of comics there. I had been kind of out of the whole comic side. In fact, I probably hadn't corresponded with my uncle for a while at that point, other than going back to Johnstown, maybe seeing him there. So I was talking to this guy who was running this little yard sale, and he found out who I was, and he was just blown away. He was like, "Wait a minute, Steve Ditko is your uncle?" That's when it kind of hit me. It was like, wow, okay. Yeah, I guess that really means something. So then he was like, come here, I got to show you something. So he takes me down into this apartment garage, and he's got 2 giant trunks full of comics. And he says, because I said, you got any Ditko? And that's obviously how the conversation started. And he says, I know I got Ditko in there. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll sell you both these trunks for $200. And he said, just because you're who you are. So I was like, I'm in. So I bought them, and that kind of started this whole thing. I started writing to my uncle more, hey, when you did Creeper, did you do this, or what was Hawk and Dove all about, or why, what was this and what was that? And then I started to attend comic conventions. And that's when it really, my world kind of cracked open, because I walk in and I say who I am. And the next thing I know, I'm talking to Jack Kirby, right, or I'm talking to Stan Lee, or I'm talking to Jim Shooter, or just because of the name, they just sort of like the doors just opened. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I just kept writing them. But most of our conversations became very philosophical. Yes, they were about, very thematic. My letters were about the family, what's going on currently, with the extended family. What is he doing? Ask him some questions, and then the sort of philosophical thing. And he became a bit of a guru to me. Yeah. So probably from the early 90s on, I kind of saw him more as a guru, a life coach.
Which makes, given his philosophical leanings and the intellectual rigor that he approached everything, whether it's, philosophically, politically, in terms of his approach and his towards life and his beliefs, that makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. And you're really getting the best of both worlds there, because you're getting Ditko the thinker and you're getting Steve Ditko, your uncle, all rolled into one, which is kind of unparalleled access to his brain.
Yeah. And then he would send me things. He started sending, he said, hey, you should read this. Have you ever heard of De Bono? You should read that. You should read this. Here's this book, or here's that book. And obviously it just eventually came to, you really should read The Fountainhead. You really should read Atlas Shrugged. You really should read those books. So he started to send me this stuff, and of course I'm reading this stuff, because that was sort of the kind of the foundation of our conversations, fundamentally. That was really the glue that kind of held us together. The rest of the stuff sort of just became, I want to say, hobbies on our relationship, as far as finding out a little bit more about comics, or what he did there, or what he did there, here or there. But I think for me, even if he wasn't my uncle, even if he had nothing to do with comics, if all that stuff aside, his level of kind of ethical, outlook on things, his integrity, his just overall morality, his underlying just basic philosophy, that was enough glue for me to have me just riveted to what he was saying.
Yeah, of course. That makes complete sense, and it's almost an unparalleled opportunity, really. I think, to have had those conversations. You must consider yourself very lucky to have had the relationship with him that you did.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? And I'll say, okay, am I? I'll just get this out there. Am I exploiting that now? Doing these things and trying to promote him. I am trying to promote him. I want people to know who he is. I want people to know more who he was. And so does my dad, and so do the other family members. We kind of want that. I just feel like I have been kind of lucky to have maybe a relationship that some others didn't have to that degree. I had my own relationship. Nobody's relationship is like anybody else's. I had my own. It was what it was. And I am absolutely happy with everything, that has gone on. And could I have done more? I'll tell you what, I have to say, in talking with people now, it's like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have thought about that question back when I was writing him, because I would have got an answer to that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, but I absolutely feel lucky, to have had the opportunity to kind of know him like I did.
Yeah, I well said, mate. And I think what you and the family are doing you're doing it very sensitively. I think the thing is that one of the ways in which you honor great artists and people who achieve great things is absolutely fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's important to respect your uncle's wishes and approach while he's living. But the thing about the lives of great people is once those people are no longer on this mortal coil, they become very interesting for historical purposes. And I think at that point, how a person chooses to live their life, but then how they are remembered as a complete artist. Their life is, whether they wish to talk about it during their life or not, their life is part of that complete spectrum. And I think you kind of almost owe it to history to open that story up a bit if you can, because your uncle's work belongs to the world now, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. You know what? This is where I love having these conversations, because it brings up so many elements of, I'll say, what I wrestle with or what others wrestle with, is because I absolutely have had my, attacks, I'll say, in a strong word, not really that blatant, about what I am doing, and why I'm doing that. Versus other people's opinions on, how something should be done, and, the sensitivity. And, people ask me, so do you think your uncle would like this bottle work show? No way. He would hate it.
No, exactly.
There's no doubt about that. He would absolutely hate it.
Yeah.
But, there's that side, and I'm not pandering to the CBFs, the comic book fans, that my uncle, had his own attitude on. I'm not necessarily doing that, but it is true. What you said is there is a high interest, and spiked interest on who he was. My dad, when he passed away, I went out to Johnstown to, help my dad and my younger brother, Patrick, with stuff. And within the first couple of days, we were talking, and my dad said, we should do a book called, Steve Ditko, the man, who he was as an uncle, as a brother, as a son, as a family member, as a friend, just so that people know, who he really was. And I absolutely 100% agreed with that. In fact, that's in progress now.
I think it's a great idea, by the way. Great idea.
And it'll probably come out 2022. But the thing is would he want that? Absolutely not. In fact, I mean, my assessment is, and sometimes I'll throw in kind of my opinion of his, I'll say, reluctance to promote the family, or his brothers and sisters and nephews and whatever, was because he was kind of trying to protect us from that media frenzy, know. So he, when we went to New York to go into his studio, the security guard said, my dad says, I'm Steve Ditko's brother. We're here to clean out his studio. And the security guard said, no, you're not. He told me over and over again, he has no relatives. So, to me, there wasn't anything, mean-spirited about that. It was a protection mechanism,
of course.
Because he didn't like that when, back when Kat Ironwood was doing her thing and doing she sent out interviews and index, mailers to all the his high school friends and family stuff. He didn't like that,
Of course.
So I think he was really just trying to protect the family in that way. But yeah, I think we now, and it's a decision, it's just right or wrong. There are some things that maybe he would have seen as more sensitive, and I can't say that, maybe even me and my dad or my brothers or anything are on the exact same page. Because I think there's still a lot of questions rolling around of what do we do? Where is there a line somewhere that we shouldn't cross? So I think that's still being kind of, finding our footing there. But after the last Spider-Man premiere, I got invited to that down in Hollywood, and I was talking to Kevin Feige, and he said, just to kind of cut to the chase in this conversation, I was telling him that we were going to start to do some things like that. And he said, you have to. He said, because if you don't, he said, 10 years from now, what will be remembered or what will be seen, he'll be seen as a caricature of who he was.
Yeah.
And what the sort of extant attitudes are. He was a cranky recluse, on and on and on, you know, withdrawn from the society, whatever. But that's not who he was. That's not the way he was. So I feel like I have to set the record straight to the degree I can on really who he was.
Mark, I think you're absolutely right. And Fagie's a very smart guy, as we both know, and his counsel is very wise. The reality is that your Uncle Steve is a figure of extreme historical interest, and you can't control the way the world regards you, the individual, and you, the individual, the artist, and your actual artistic output. And once you're no longer on this plane of existence, if you don't control the information that comes out and make sure that it's treated with as much intellectual rigor and as truthful as possible, people will still dig around and put out as much information as they can. And it's far better for you, the family, to be at the center of that process and for everything that comes out to be a genuine reflection of the man, rather than a bunch of harebrained biographies. I mean, I've already seen that your dad's extremely detailed correspondence with his fan base, which is fantastic, and which has surfaced in a number of ways since his death. There's a website that reprints a lot of those letters, and at least one person has published a collection of that correspondence over time.
Yeah, David Curry.
And the slant of that particular book is, myself and my long-term friendship with Steve Ditko, as we know, actually, Steve carried on those interactions with a lot of people. I was one of them. I've chosen, for the time being, I've shared it with you, but I've chosen to keep my kind of correspondence to myself, right? But the whole thing is some of that is opportunistic, and some of it is an interesting historical document. But I think the reason people are so interested in those things is they can't get right behind the velvet curtain and see the detail of his life. But people will keep on trying to do it, and because people are trying to do it, I think you will serve him the best in the long term by actually catering and looking after that process yourself.
Yeah, I have I don't know. To me, it's everyone has their own sort of rules or guiding rules of their life. That sort of allows them to sort of fall back on and make decisions. And one of the ones that I think that drives me relative to this, and it probably doesn't drive others, it's just an internal motivation, is I think that all the rumors and speculation and innuendo on my uncle was created by my uncle in a way. He, obviously not directly, but indirectly by, and so my datum, is nature abhors a vacuum. When you do not put something in there, something will go in there, some kind of crap or whatever nonsense will go in there. So to me, the only way you circumvent that is to put truth in there, to actually put something in there. So now he started to do that when he started to write his essays.
Yes,
and,
absolutely. Yeah.
So that was huge. And he hadn't done that for a long time. And all of a sudden, he got a motivation, to start to get his essays out there, which, okay, it's great to say, let my art speak for myself. It's like, okay, well, the stalker, what is the stalker really telling me about you, or something? Shade the changing man. Yeah. Okay. But when he started to get into the essays, okay, now that's his words right from the horse's mouth, So one of the things that I want to do is I want to compile a book of everything he ever wrote.
Fantastic.
So that's something I think, to me, will, in his own words, get that out there. But in the meantime, I want to do stuff like this to try to fill that vacuum. Yeah, because he did create that vacuum, and it did suck in a lot of crap in there that was unwarranted, unjustified, and just flat out wrong based on little fragments of one lettered response where he was curt with someone who for the 400,000th time asked him to draw Spider-Man for him, know?
Right.
Like, okay, give me a break here,
Yeah.
So they make this whole opinion over that, curt response, and they post it. But I think obviously there's a lot that can be, disseminated about him in an intelligent way to get people to, understand who he was better.
Yeah. Yeah, that is very well said, Mark. I think it's very well said indeed. In terms of what you're working on now, actually, can I ask you before I ask you this? Can I ask you a question? Did you ever visit Steve at his studio before he passed?
No.
So you only went there once he was no longer with us.
Yep. Never. I just never had the opportunity to just kind of connect up with that. I run my own business and I travel quite a bit. And the one time I went out there, I did I had a big job, a couple big jobs in New York subway, because I'm a civil engineer.
Yeah.
And it just never connected up, Yeah. And as he got older, his hearing wasn't getting so good, it started to get some physical, restrictions. And you know what? He wasn't up for it, and I wasn't going to push him. So I never connected up with him in his studio.
No, that makes sense. And in the latter part of his life, was his studio his primary residence as well? Oh,
no. He had an apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So his studio was whatever the 211, or 650 East Broadway, depending on which address he was. And then it was, just down, you come out of the building and you hang a right, and there was another building, and then a little corner merchandise gift shop.
Yeah.
And then there was, I think it was 75th Street or something. I can't remember what street. And you cross that, and 2 buildings down was an apartment complex, and that's where his apartment was.
Oh wow! That's interesting. I hadn't appreciated that. That's so he lived within a stone's throw of his studio for decades.
Yeah, and his bank was just right up the street. Up a couple minute walk. Up 75th.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So Mark, looking at it from the outside, as you live through your life and find work as a civil engineer, and you had your own life and your own focus. At what point did you realise? Was it around so you started to really realise what a big name your uncle was within comics when you started to interact at the Comic Cons and whatnot, and that scene, and with other professionals, like as you said, you met Kirby and you met other people like that. It seemed to me from the outside, as a lifelong Ditko fan, and a person who's always truly appreciated his work, and he was always my favourite creator, not just artist but writer, artist, whatever. It seemed to me that what was something of an accelerant in terms of the fame of the Ditko name was when the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man picture came out, because that's when your uncle started getting a big credit on the movies themselves, and it was a very big. I mean, I remember going to see. So, as you know, I used to be a movie journalist and a magazine publisher, and I reviewed that. I reviewed Spider-Man for a couple of the magazines I was writing for at the time, The Enemy and Uncut, which are both music magazines. I mainly wrote about movies for Music Mags, right? And I was the publisher of Uncut at the time. And I went to see the first UK journalist screening of that Spider-Man movie with an editor at Titan called David Leitch. And there were only 2 other people in the audience. And the 2 other people in the audience were Joe Cornish, who went on to direct a movie called Attack the Block, and Jonathan Ross, who famously made, who of course.
Yeah.
And I didn't know Ross at the time. I've met him since, as you know, but I back then, so I didn't chat with him. he was sat about 3 rows in front of me, himself and David, and we're the only 4 people in the screening room. This is at Sony Pictures in London in the basement. They used to have this lovely pub. So we're the first 4 people in the UK who watch it. And when the titles roll, when the title card came up, which was created by Stanley and Steve Ditko, myself and Leach let out a massive cheer, and Cornish and Ross turned around and smiled because they got it completely. And we were just all so amped because until I saw it, I didn't know whether they were going to give Steve credit or not. And that was amazing to me at the time. And it felt like a complete validation of all the work that he'd done and his contribution on one level, on one level.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it struck me that from that point on, I would imagine that the Ditko name started becoming well known outside of just comics. Was that your experience of it, or was that something you didn't really feel at the time?
You know what? It's so funny because I see things through a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
I'm on a whole different rail system, because my name is Ditko.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't necessarily see that when I started to become more visible and go to comic conventions. I was just telling people who I was, and it was already connecting the dots with people who already knew who he was.
Of course.
So I don't know that had any real impact on me at all. And it was, to me, what I would get connected with when people would find out who I was were the diehard Ditkos who already knew who he was.
Of course.
From Spider-Man or Doctor Strange or anything else that he was doing. So, the movie coming out, I didn't necessarily see any impact because the people who are really connecting with me already knew who he was.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense. And I've always thought that it's very interesting to me that outside of your human physical interactions, the existence of yourself and your family was mostly, to my eyes, throughout Steve's life, kind of shrouded in mystery. I'd heard rumors that you guys existed, and I never knew if it was apocryphal, if you really did exist.
The mythical Ditko family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what it was like. And I remember talking to Will Eisner once, who was at that time under the impression that, either you or your brother weren't his nephews, but it's his sons. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, man, so what? Steve Ditko was married at one point. And then sometimes, oh no, he's got a bunch of siblings, and they've got children, and it's his nieces and nephews, which turns out to be the case. But I always used to think, I mean, come on, the name Ditko is so unusual. There really can't be many knocking around. And there's a strong chance if there's anybody out there in the US who's not Steve with the surname Ditko, they must be related to him, which of course is true. But it was like suddenly once Steve passed, it was like an avalanche of information. And that's when I think a lot of people really tagged onto your presence. And then as you got involved in your uncle's estate, then it became a whole other thing. And it was like, oh man. And I thought it was so fascinating that he'd done such a good job of actually shrouding your existence in that kind of mystery. And that to the point where people were so, I think, respectful of your uncle and his wishes, that even when you went out and about at various shows and met various professionals, they then didn't on their blogs or on their social media or whatever go, man, I was talking to Steve's nephew the other day and ... A lot of that stuff wasn't publicly reported, which it would be with just about any other artist. I mean, artist in the extended sense of the word. And I think the reason that it wasn't is because a lot of those creators, the guys you met, they had such respect for your uncle and the way he lived his life.
Yeah, I totally agree. But there's another element to that. And it's the fact that the family ourselves aligned our presence with what my uncle wanted. I was talking to my dad, and my dad said, I guess it was a couple of years ago. And he said, Uncle Steve never really wanted to talk about his work when he came home. Yeah. So when he would visit, he didn't talk about his work. It was kind of like, I'm a family member now. I mean, I'm putting on a different hat. I'm a family member. I'm an uncle. I'm a brother. I'm a son. So I'd rather not, let's not talk about it's not all about him. He wasn't one to be the center of attention in that way. So I think the family were sort of, grooved in to just, it's not something we talked about, because if he didn't want to, he didn't really care. We honored that and we just didn't. So there was the side of him that people did it maybe out of respect, to not mention that they kind of know us or whatever. But I think there was also, from the family's perspective, we were just like keeping it mum, because we knew that's what he wanted, So that was another part of it. We didn't, I probably was the one that was, most overt about it when I'd go to comic conventions, because I wanted to talk to Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and Jim Shooter and all those guys, So I kind of was one a little bit more open, and, and I wrote him about it, that I was going there, and Jack would say, hey, the next time you see him, ask him if he ever got a girlfriend, or something.
Yeah. So,
I would relay those things. And he just took it in stride, he didn't say, stop doing that or whatever. So, he let me kind of do my own thing, but I was being respectful of not, going too far about that and making sure that he knew what I was doing. There was definitely a little bit of a family tight-lipped piece element to that as well.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I had a feeling you might say that, because that's, of course, how you keep that situation intact for such a period of time. You've really got to be aligned in order for no further information to come out. So I think for a lot of hardcore Ditko fans like myself, it was kind of an amazing side effect of Steve passing, and he didn't pass tragically, because he lived to a ripe old age, and he was incredibly productive right till the end. Yep. But at that moment where he transformed into his next plane of existence, whatever you believe that to be, and whatever it was for Steve, whatever it is, it was so interesting, the kind of avalanche of family information that suddenly appeared, endlessly fascinating to people like myself, who'd spent, a lifetime kind of thinking, man, I wonder what kind of guy he is, And the thing is, I think also, and I think this is where you get these fans with preconceived ideas, a lot of his hardcore fans were very respectful of that, very respectful of what he did and how he approached life, and not wishing to discuss or promote his personal life outside of his work. So a lot of people simply didn't ask those questions. I know there are people who did. Well, that's a very different thing. But I think I've really enjoyed the graceful way that you've interacted with your uncle's fan base since his passing.
Yeah, I try to be, I don't know, I want to say sensitive. I say what I want to say, but I feel like I'm intelligent enough to do it correctly. And I kind of feel like, I've just like, Howard Stern kind of dubs himself, I've dubbed myself the Steve Ditko philosophical monitor.
Yeah.
I'm the one that feel like just because I decide that I am, is when David Curry wrote his book, he sent me the manuscript. Zach Cruz, he sent me his manuscript. The Ditko play, Lenny would put that together. He sent me the manuscript before this stuff even went out. I read all that stuff multiple times and gave them tons of comments.
Yeah.
Zach's I didn't, because I absolutely loved Zach Cruz's book, Mysterious Traveler. That one just right off the shelf was just dead on. But brilliant. David, I gave David a pile of comments and he picked them all up. He just very willingly, struck this out, reworded that, and then Lenny, same thing. He massaged his stuff. So anybody that has been writing stuff, and once they connect with me, if I don't want to portray him in an incorrect way. Yeah. So I try my best to do things in a correct, aligning with, my uncle's attitude, and philosophy. So I try my best, to do that. And I feel like I'm not doing too bad a job.
No, you're doing a great job, mate. It's fantastic. I can see the intellectual rigor that you apply to that, and I can see how important it is to you. And it's wonderful to know that Steve's legacy and Steve's lifetime of work is in such great, caring hands. I think that's the thing that means the most to me. I think if I was in a similar situation, I would hope that I approached it with the same degree of intellectual rigor and empathy that you've done. I think it's lovely to see. And speaking of all of that, Mark, what is it that? So, first of all, what in terms of you? I take it you cleared out the studio when Steve passed. That the studio doesn't exist anymore, presumably, or is rented out to somebody else. So. Do you, the family, now control all of the art? Do you have all the artwork that was returned to Steve? Have you got all that kind of safely stored away?
Well, I'll just say that everything that was in his studio and apartment, we have.
Got it. Totally understand.
Yeah.
Now we might be in the realms of, there are certain questions I might have, nitty-gritty questions here that you don't want to ask, which I totally you don't want to answer, which I totally respect, mate. But the thing I've always been curious about, and I suspect this might be one of them, and it might be near the top of the list. Do those two issues of Doctor Strange that he inked and penciled but weren't submitted to Marvel, do they physically exist?
Well, okay, so here we have some never before said or spoken statements. This is you have some exclusives, maybe because of this line of questioning. We did not find those.
Oh man, what pity. Yeah.
Just saying. It's like, I unfortunately, and I'll tell you what, as a family, we're still waffling. At least I was, on what was going to be said relative to some of that stuff. Yeah. And I had a conversation with my brother. He had his, opinion, and eventually we kind of came to an agreement. But yeah, those pages, I hate to disappoint people. And for years, I've been just keeping my mouth shut. But we did not find those.
Oh, what about so a guy I think you probably know. I'm sure you know our mutual friend. Carl Potts, longtime Marvel editor. I was talking to him with this show the other week, and we about half of his episode, by the way, is about him reminiscing, because he knew your uncle well, worked with him, met him a lot more times than a lot of people have, and he was reminiscing about his working life with Steve. And it's about half of his episode. But one of the things we were both getting really excited about was the potential existence of those of that artwork. So thank you for asking that, mate. Do you, without getting...
I hate to say some of that stuff. It's been so hard for me to just go, now, do they still exist somewhere? Did he do something with them? Did he send them to somebody? Does Robin Snyder have them? I have no idea. It just pains me because I know what it means, to say, and that's what it's been just gnawing at me to just, it's taken me 3 years to just come to say those words,
of course,
because
everybody, like myself, like Carl, everyone who's listening to this, everyone's hoping for here it is, Marvel publish it, and they do an extended Ditko Doctor Strange omnibus with the with the two.
I understand the ramifications.
Everyone's looking for that for sure. Yeah, for sure. And Mark, are there any in terms of the show that you're putting on at the moment or your future plans? Are there any real gems that you found that you think people will very much respond to?
You know what? I don't know what necessarily people are going to respond to, but this show, I'll say this, it actually was intended to align more with our release of our book, the Steve Ditko, the man. Like my brother just told me what the title actually was. That was Steve Ditko, the man, was kind of a working title. He just told me what the title actually was, but I can't remember it right now. But it was really supposed to align with that and be more of a family friend, things about his past, is because towards the tail end of my uncle's life, he was sending things to my dad, photos and memorabilia and military stuff and discharge papers and all this other personal stuff. So, really this show was intended to display and present that in alignment with the book, more photos of him and, things never before seen, more from a family friend, perspective, not so much as an artistic, display of things, although that's going on. But this show in our minds was never really, presented in that way. It was more of a again, just trying to align with the upcoming book. Yeah. So, I'd have to say, and again, not to disappoint people, but I don't necessarily know there's any artwork that's going to just blow people's minds, just been waiting to see that, I knew he had it or something. I don't know that that's going to happen.
I think what will blow people's minds is what you've already got planned. I mean, to have that window into your family life and Steve the man. I mean, there's already, just from that alone, because he was so guarded about, there's so few things eked out during the course of his life, images and whatnot, and a few more have eked out since he's passed. I remember everybody going bananas, that picture of your uncle with all of you as kids, and he's got his kind of sports shirt on, because that, and he's got a big beaming smile, he's with his family. Everybody's blown away by that photo. And I think the great thing that you've done is you haven't put out an avalanche of this stuff on the road up to the show, and every little image that you put out, people just go nuts. People I know. And there's just a furore of, man, have you seen this? Yeah. My inbox, whenever you release one of your pictures of your Uncle Steve, just is on fire, because my various industry friends are always like, hey, Sumner, you've got to look at this, man. You've got to do it. So I love the way that you've done that. So Mark, what do you, in addition to your as yet untitled Steve Ditko the Man, what other publications are you guys working on at the moment?
Well, the other thing that's kind of in the works is the compiled Mr. A book.
Fantastic.
So yeah,
is that with IDW, mate?
Yep.
So are you dealing with Scott at IDW about that?
Yep.
Yeah, I think I've said this to you before, but he's a very good friend of mine, actually. We co-published some stuff about 10, 15 years ago. There's no bigger and more knowledgeable fan of your uncle than Scott. He really knows
Scott's
what he's doing. He's amazing. He's a wonderful person. And we'll treat it with the, I don't know if you've ever seen the Steranko volume that they did, but it's incredible. So I know if you're going to do the complete Mr. A, you're doing it with the right guys, because I would imagine, knowing them, they'll pursue several formats. One will be a complete Mr. A, and they'll probably look at one of the big, large format original art books as well.
That's what it is. It's going to be the large format book.
I cannot wait for that, mate. Yep. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And presumably you have other plans as well, which must be coalescing in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, we have other. I mean, I have kind of like thoughts that I want to do. I've been approached by others with projects that they want to do. Right now, the only ones that are really, and I'll say that my dad and my two cousins that represent my two aunts' families. So there's three families really. My dad, my family of my Aunt Betty, and then the family of my Aunt Annie, who were the four siblings, my uncle, my dad, and my two aunts. They're working on, what they're going to do, and they're deciding right now. They've only decided to do the Mr. A book, the family book, the Bottle Work show. And then, I have some other things that I've been talking to them about, like the essay. I want to do the essay book.
Great.
And I have some other things that I have other people that are approaching me on. The other one that's we've been chattering about for a while is doing an actual documentary.
Oh, for sure.
So that's the one that we have that's the most discussion that's ongoing now, which I'm going back to Johnstown in a couple of days, midweek, and staying with, my dad and my mom. So I'm sure at some point conversations on that will come up and kind of see where that's going. I've been approached by a couple different people to really help big players.
I know. I imagine you've got some very credible people who've stepped up. I can imagine who some of those people are, and they're the kind of people who can get it made for you as well. Which with the level of access you've got, I think the world is crying out for that documentary, because, of course, when you get a really prestigious documentary, I would say it's analogous to, say, some of the Elvis documentaries that have been made in the last decade, or the Frank Sinatra documentaries that have been made in the last decade. They're exhaustive. They're 3 hours long. You get a real insight into the people, and it's kind of invaluable work. To do that for Steve, I think you'd be hugely honouring his memory doing that, mate.
I just want to do something before somebody else does.
Of course you should.
Before the Kirby Ditko Lee documentary comes out that then paints my uncle in a bad light. It's just like, I feel like I just want to, I'm kind of anxious to get that in motion, because I want the right stuff to come out sooner rather than later.
I agree. I mean, I think a classic example would be, I've been amazed, even though your uncle himself debunked it, just how much legs the myth about him leaving Spider-Man because he was arguing for the Green Goblin to be anonymous.
I just read that
and Stan was arguing for the Green Goblin to be, Norman Osborn.
Will not die.
When your uncle wrote a whole fucking essay about the fact that he intended it to be. Not only did he intend it to be Norman Osborn, that was his idea. Because at that point, Stan wasn't plotting the books; it's all your uncle. So it's such a fucking ridiculous rumor.
It will die.
Yeah, I know, and it just perpetuates because the thing about Stan, whatever your view about Stan was, what he did have for a long, long time, because he's such a huckster of a personality and was super interactive and super talkative and was very, very good at promoting himself. Yeah. And I don't wish to say any negative things about Stan, because Stan had a lot of positive things. But also, if you read that recent biography about the Abraham Reisman book about Stan, that's pretty much who he was. Light and shadow. Nobody's perfect, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is, because he was always the voice on record, and he never had a very good memory, and every story he told was with the slant of bigging up Stanley, the brand. That's 30, 40 years of talking to the media on a level that Steve never did and Jack hardly ever did. So there's a lot of these narratives that have been propagated and just live on, and they're all bollocks. They're just not true. I've been on so as a journalist, I was on a lifelong mission before it was in vogue. So every time I ever had cause to write about your uncle's creations. So the reason, even though I was the publisher, the magazines I used to run, I always used to do all the Spider-Man reviews. When the original Spider-Man movie was released in the UK, when Spider-Man 2 was released in the UK, one of the quotes on both of those posters was from me. One of the reasons that I took those assignments and pulled rank is because I would always have a paragraph talking about the creation of Spider-Man, which was created by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee, and mention that most of the work was your uncle's, which wasn't the popularity of the time. And I've been doing that for years. Every time there's been some kind of screen iteration, just in my own small way, and it's always frustrated me that there is such a lot of horseshit swirling around about that era in your uncle's life, and it's so easy to correct. And he himself wrote extensively about it. I mean, his whole Spider-Man series of essays, that's brilliantly illuminating stuff. And also he's dead right, because the reality is, I would say that Stan's great flaw is that at heart, he went to his grave believing, or had convinced himself and believed, that he was really the creator of Spider-Man, of the Fantastic Four, etc. I don't think, even though he did claim it, he can't really claim it for Doctor Strange, because Stan himself is in print for saying it's all Steve's idea. It's actually, he wrote that, but he did a very good job in later life of covering that up as well. Yeah. So it's the fact that he went to go believing that. Of course, nobody else believes that. Not even people who are big lovers of Stan Lee, like myself. What's great about your uncle's essays about the creation of Spider-Man, it's all about the fact that it's a two-person effort. And the name Spider-Man, written down on a piece of paper, hasn't ever been used by the whole Marvel company as their logo. It's that amazing costume that Steve designed, which has gone on to be one of the most famous images of the 20th century. And that's all your uncle. Super iconic, beyond iconic, super iconic. I mean, you're talking about an image that the Spider-Man face, the Spider-Man costume, is instantly recognizable in a way that perhaps only two of the logos are, and that's the Batman logo and the Superman logo. Those two, and the Spider-Man face. Nothing is recognizable as that. Maybe Elvis, maybe Marilyn Monroe, but that's it, right? There's nothing else.
Right. Yeah.
So I think you're doing very valuable work, mate. Now, Mark, before we close out, we've really talked a lot about the fabric of what you're doing with and for the Ditko estate, and when you look back on your uncle's output, in each of his kind of key eras, and when I'm saying his key eras, what I really mean by his core era at Marvel, and then his core era at DC in the late 60s, and then also his period of time working for Charlton. So I'm not really talking about his self-published Robin Snyder stuff, with which I'm very familiar, or Mr. A, with which I'm very familiar. But I'm interested for you, when you look at his Marvel work, what's your favorite piece of his Marvel work?
Okay, I love Doctor Strange.
Yeah,
to me that's obvious. But so I think it was probably in the 90s, maybe 90s or early 2000s. He started to send me his file copies of stuff.
Yeah,
and just boxes and boxes and boxes of it. So at one point, I started to go through it, and he didn't save. In some cases, he didn't save the whole comic. He would just save the story, and he would have it in a sleeve. So I started to dig these things out. I was going through my comics, and I started to put out all of those 5-pagers that he did in the 50s, early 60s. And those things just blew my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at those things and I'm just gobsmacked. Like, I can't believe the output and the quality and the story. And it's, to me, that I mean, of course, I love Doctor Strange because of who Doctor Strange is, and he's iconic in his own way. But that 50s era and the 60s era, when they were doing those 5-pagers, to me, that body of work just blows my mind. It was just so much of it, the output, and the stories were just so readable, and the artwork was just fantastic. So I could stare at those. I was just going through them again just the other day. I could stare at those for days.
I think that's very well said. I completely agree with you. I think the O. Henry-esque 5-page stories with Tristan the Tale that he did scores of with Stan, I think they're a real high watermark in his career. And I think just looking at that stuff, I think they're very, very powerful and so fabulously suited to his artwork as well. Yeah.
But when you started talking, said, okay, so I'll say this. When you went say, okay, what's my favorite sort of Marvel type thing? I have to say, I went to, actually, I like his wash work in Erie and his Warren work.
Yeah, right.
I mean, his wash work. I was staring at that stuff the other day too. Deep Ruby and all of those. It's just like, oh man, that is just phenomenal art. Just phenomenal. Yeah. So I got to say, I love that artwork.
Yeah, it is lovely artwork. I have a particular fondness. The reason I mentioned the Charlton era is the way I first encountered most of your uncle's Charlton work is we used to have these reprint British comic books called Astounding and called Suspense and whatnot that used to come over here in the 60s and 70s. And they mainly reprinted non-DC, non-Marvel stuff. So they reprinted a lot of Charlton, and they actually reprinted a lot of Tower Comics, the Thunder Agent stuff, but in black and white. So I first encountered things like Captain Atom and The Question just in black and white. And it looks amazing in black and white. It looks incredible because your uncle's amazing line work, you just see all of it. And I think you could tell that he was given, he might not made a lot of bread working for Charlton, but he was given a massive amount of creative leeway, it seems to me, just looking at the work.
Well, to me, I think as a evolution of kind of the Spider-Man era, I love the artwork of Blue Beetle.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
To me, Blue Beetle is, talk about just the continuity from the Spider-Man era in terms of action, moving into the Blue Beetle. To me, what a beautiful evolution, and in continuity of his art, panel layout, and just the dynamic nature of his. I mean, to me, I love the Charlton stuff. I love Blue Beetle.
Me too. And then to close out this particular reverie, another thing. So I might as well name check the other things I'm very fond of. So I've talked to you about these. The other thing would be there's a huge amount of creative dynamism to the work he did on the Creeper and the work he did on Hawk and Dove. And I picked those comics up in real time when I was about 10, when they came out. And man, they just blew me away because it felt like it was pure Ditko almost. Certainly at first, both of those. They're such unusual books, particularly for DC to be producing at the time. But they have a real abiding power to them, I think.
I can't believe how many, okay, so I'm a Ditko hoarder,
Yeah.
I can't, there was a period like through the 90s, 2000s, I'm every time I would see an issue of, I don't care if it was Speedball or Shade the Changing Man, or every time I saw a showcase, Hawk and Dove or a Creeper, I bought it.
Yeah,
I'm leafing through my comics and going, oh my God, there's another Creeper. Oh my God,
right.
I must have 15 or 20 of those. Showcase 73, 75.
Of course,
because I just love them. Yeah. So I feel you there.
I'm also a multiple. I'm owner of, maybe not as many as you, but I have multiple copies of Showcase 73.
I'm a hoarder.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've got there's a combination I love, and indeed this is what a lot of my correspondence with your uncle was about his occasional partnership with Wally Wood, who I think the interesting thing about Steve is few people were able to ink him anywhere near as successfully as he inked himself. And people who tune into this podcast a lot will have heard me say this before in other conversations with like-minded people. But one of the people who was a very different artist to Steve, but complemented his work brilliantly as an inker, was Wally Wood. And you would think their styles would not be complementary. I think that's what's fascinating about it. But whether it's Stalker or whether it's the other book I'm about to name check, The Destructor for Atlas, that issue 1 of The Destructor is one of my favorite comic books of all time. I still own the one copy that I bought back in the early 70s when it came out. And the combination of Archie Goodwin writing it and Steve and Wally doing the art, I must have reread that book like 150, 200 times. And I really do think it's an absolute Ditko gem, that book. I love it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think I pulled it out because I was bringing a selection of various comics to the show to see if I could, put up kind of a range of comics that I have that he gave me. And I think I pulled that one out.
Oh, great! Yeah, it's absolutely spectacular. I think, Mark, the other thing is that I'm supreme. I don't get envious at all. Envy is not an emotion that I feel, and it's not really the right word to use. I don't really feel envious, but when I was talking to Carl the other day, he was saying, well, I'm on my way to go and see I'm seeing the Johnstown show this week. And I was like, man, in the normal course of my working life for the last 2 decades, I've spent 6 months of my year in the US.
Oh, wow.
And traveling around, flying the pop culture flag, doing various things. And had this been a normal year, and that all stopped dead the last time I was in the States was last February 2020. I came back and I basically haven't been out of my living room since then. But if I was living my normal life, you can bet your life that if you've been running this for 2 months between July and September, anywhere, any time other than this year, I would have been there 100%. I would have been on the phone going, Mark, mate, I'm on my way. I'm coming to see this show. So I really do absolutely wish with just about every fibre of my being that I could be there at the show and see it. And that's why I like your plans of ultimately taking it on the road and doing other things with it, because I desperately want to see it myself, mate.
Well, okay. With that, I guarantee you're there in spirit. I will make sure that your vibe is there emanating. But it is something that there's been chatter about having it every year there in Johnstown, amazing, or as a cyclic thing. So we'll see, where that goes. And obviously, every year it would probably get better and better. So this is just the launch point, which hope that it all is well taken and gives us enough motivation to kind of keep it going. But I'd love to take it on the road.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I'm all over it. When I'm traveling again, it is the first thing I'm going to do. And when you get to see it, I think whether it's resonant, whether it's true or not, I mean, you've obviously had some input, which is great. The stage play, I think is very good, very, very entertaining. I think the guy who plays your uncle is great. I mean, how I'll be fascinated to hear how he plays out to you. But I think the casting, the guy who plays your uncle and the guy who plays Stan are both excellent. So I really enjoyed their performances. I don't know how truthful to them as human beings they are, but I think it'll be an interesting ride for you to watch that. Oh, you've seen the tape anyway, right?
Yeah, but here's the thing is, Lenny's coming back to do it, but he's doing it with another troupe.
Wow. Okay.
Troupe in Johnstown.
Wow. So different set of actors.
Yep.
Now that's going to be interesting, mate. That's
yes.
Well, that is a staple of theatrical entertainment, of course. So whether there's that changing cast would be very interesting, I think.
We'll see.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for spending this hour chatting to me and talking to me about the amazing work you're doing with your uncle's legacy and with your uncle's estate. I am 1,000% behind, as you know, everything that you're doing. And I just couldn't be happier to see Steve's incredible legacy in such amazingly caring hands. And who more caring than his loving nephew? That's the key.
I do what I can when I can, I'll keep doing it.
Yeah, and that's music to my ears, brother. That's what I want to hear. So that's the big hard agree from me. Mark, thanks so much for joining me today, pal.
It's been a pleasure being here. Until next time.
Until next time, brother, and I will see you sooner rather than later. All the very best. Take care.
Bye.
You've been listening to Hard Agree. This episode was edited by John Horsley and Kenrick Regan, and our theme music, Golden, was written and performed for this show by Liverpool's finest band, Denio. Hard Agree is a production of the Spoilerverse and myself, Andrew Sumner.